I hope this doesn't sound too bad, but before I started watching Active Raid, I did have lots of doubts about it. Not because of the poster, which was quite average looking, but because it was streaming on Crunchyroll UK. I have nothing against legal anime streaming whatsoever, but still, I did have this bad feeling that Crunchyroll UK is like a dumping ground for bad sci-fi anime. Total Eclipse was bad, Fafnir Exodus was bad, Asterisk War was average at best. They have gotten a lot better though, what with Classroom Crisis, kind of, and Gundam Blooded Orphans. I thought I was being too harsh because it's definitely not their fault if the science fiction anime they choose to stream is bad, but with all that said, Active Raid, judging by this first episode, is a cold science fiction anime. You thought Macross Delta was bad? At least Macross Delta tried to be new. This episode of Active Raid did nothing special. Nothing! Even though it has police and robots and crime. So in episode 1 of Active Raid, an inspector is assigned to a team in order to work with them and report on how competent they are to her superiors. The team just so happened to encounter a case involving 2 inexperienced criminals, so they deploy 2 mechs, the pilots of which don't get along, in order to defeat the bad guys. And guess what, people? The good guys win. Are you starting to get a sinking feeling just by hearing this episode's synopsis? There are so many cliches in this episode. I literally wrote them all down into a list, and I don't usually do that. Usually I just watch the episode and review it without having to take any notes, but this time the notebook and pen came out the bag. This episode begins with narrative exposition on the world. It is short, thank goodness, but it reminded me of how common narration is in the first episode of an anime series. There are other ways of informing the audience, you know. Then I started to hear jazz music. Jazz is a particular cliche in cyberpunk media. Usually it can work, but it annoyed me this time around. Personally, it reminded me of that god-awful anime AD Police to Protect and Serve, and also, it didn't suit this anime. Active Raid is not futuristic enough, ergo beautiful enough to warrant jazz music, which is a beautiful sound. It would have worked so much better if the music was more atmospheric, as it would have actually drawn me into whatever was happening, even though everything that was happening was completely bland. The final issue I had with this episode is its characters. I don't remember a single one of them. Not one. Did this anime limit the amount of characters it showed to us and tried to make me interested in the very few that I got? No, but just threw loads of forgettable characters at my face in the hope that I would get engaged by the sheer amount of them. None of them are interesting, and it was really sad watching Kazari, the lead female, get ignored and pushed to one side by the characters we're supposed to like. I suppose the animation was okay and the 3D looked pretty clean, but this episode was so full of cliches and forgettable characters that it just became a bland blur. That's not the fault of Crunchyroll UK, that's the fault of Studio IMS. Less is more in media, and I wish this episode minimized its approach and tried something different so that there's fewer characters and more focus on what makes them and the story, if there is one, tick.